Welcome back to another episode of the Future of the Music Industry podcast. I am Javi. I am, as always, joined by my two co-hosts, Aaron Atlas Neal and Derek Prez Jackson. We are going to be talking today about the kind of unveiling of some of our student entertainers' rosters for this 2024-2025 school year, and some of the logistics that we have set up to track their kind of advancement and releases as artists. Prez, would you like to start us out with that? I know you've been working on kind of the under the hood development end of that.
Yeah, so I guess first we just kind of, for context, we'll talk about the fact that for those of you who may just be tuning in and not really knowing what NCEG is or what it's about or how any of this works, basically, long story short, we have these student-run labels or talent agencies that at the beginning of the semester have been positioning themselves in order to find the best possible talent on their campus. And, we have these aspiring executives or young executives that have really, done their preliminary work. They recruited on campus, they've done their auditions, and now we're getting into the fun part. Now we're getting to the part where, all right, their artists have been named and they're ready to start to show them off. So on our end, on the back end, with us being NCEG's administrative body, those students are required to actually register all of the acts that they're planning to present over the course of the next, the rest of this year. So, we have some new faces, some old faces. Some of the chapters have already started, producing events. That debut their talent, and it's just been a really, really exciting time, honestly. It's been a really, really exciting time. So we have some artists that are returning and some new faces, and all of this will start to make sense for those of you who have been following us for a while. But for those, who haven't, we got some returning artists from both Georgia State and Kennesaw, returning artists like Dre TL, Wavy H2O on the Georgia State side. Some switch up in the roster. So a rap group has formed at Georgia State by the name of Collective Codes. Formerly, Haru and Gateway were two artists that were formerly a part of the Georgia State chapter, where they've merged now and go under this name Collective Codes. So we're going to see what they do. They were actually one of the artist groups that was actually able to turn out a profit towards the end of last semester. So they have a little bit of hype around them because, money is always fun.
Sure.
So we're going to be tracking those conversion numbers this year around. And then on the Kennesaw side, we have returning artists of obviously J Activist, Nia Lindo, and Pia Valencia. KSU's, I want to say, top MVP, Southside Poet, has since graduated, so they don't have him no more. But they do still have J Activist. And then we have a lot of new names, just reading off this list right now. Mo Fetty at Georgia State, K and Ais, Asiko, and then Kill Streak Roy, and artist by the name of Spuda. I think it goes by Spuda Jr., but we just got some old artists, some new artists, so we're just looking forward to what it is that they're gonna be doing this year.
Absolutely. And if you did catch what he said, he mentioned MVP. That was kind of referring to a school against school competition that we've run in the past that we will also be bringing back in the future called Mobiles. That is where we essentially put the certified entertainers from each school after they have been kind of trained by both their coach and the management of the chapter, kind of head to head against other students. And kind of backtracking from there, I suppose, to kind of understand more about our CE process in general. So all artists have to essentially audition once they join their chapter and are judged on a standardized scale that is mandated by the nonprofit itself to be kind of put forward as a certified entertainer, and those are the artists that will foremost be performing both at their campuses and at other campuses. So if you, say, for example, at Georgia State, want to perform at Kennesaw, Georgia Tech, and kind of the surrounding colleges, make sure that not only do you sign up for your chapter, but you also come to audition so that you can become a CE. Atlas, I know in the past you've also been both of y'all have been a coach, I suppose. And I want to assume that there's kind of been some calamity whenever CEs are kind of announced. Is there any kind of organization that is kind of necessary to happen to kind of control the chaos and make sure that everyone gets time to rehearse and kind of a stage to perform on kind of throughout the year?
It really depends on your coaching style. That's how I would answer that question. And I know that's something that, and I guess for today, it's appropriate to kind of illustrate a little bit of the history of that, if you don't mind tagging along with me on this one, Derek. But when Derek, when you guys early on developed the concept of NCEG, there were parts of it that had to be scaled out. But one of the things that was always thought of in the beginning at some level was the idea that every campus operates differently from other campuses at least 50% of the time, right? Like every campus is going to be different in some way. So when the coaching came around, which, what was it? Last year was the first year, the year before?
I think it was the year before.
It was the year before that we actually had coaches, like active coaches for other teams, right? And so it was the first year that we had a chance to do that. So what was it? Rock was at Kennesaw. I was at GGC.
Daisha was at the AU Center.
Yeah, Daisha was at AU, and you were at Georgia State, Derek. So that was the first time we had like 4 coaches actually like with the full-fledged capacity of moguls pushing out their chapters to compete. The interesting part about this is we had 4 different versions of how chapters are going to be run because of it. And really it was just because the coaches were curated by the admin staff. It was in a way intentional for it to work that way, but how it all turned out at the other end was you saw from Jump Street that what would have worked for me at GGC wouldn't have worked at KSU the same way. Sure. I wouldn't have chosen the same talent. I wouldn't have chosen the same administration. I wouldn't have chosen, a lot of things because my style is my style of coaching, but also the campus is its own entity.
Right.
When you're talking about when any chapter is starting to build itself up, it needs to be understood first and foremost that you have to build your chapter based on what your campus can support. Georgia State, for example, can support a chapter operating like a label. It's got all the resources and all the necessary, interaction from the student body to be able to operate like a label. KSU has that same thing where they can operate like a label. What we've seen before, the AUC has an opportunity to do that. However, it might be better to operate more as a talent agency or have an agency style chapter for a place like that. I know for GGC, trying to make it a label didn't make sense on that campus. And honestly, it's really just based on how the campus operates with its own students. There's not so much happening on that campus that you have a controlled environment to be able to push out content and get a response consistently. That's the place where most people live off campus. You have a lot of students that come there, that commute. Well, they don't really have a whole lot of reason to be on campus when they're not there. So where I ended up on that at the end of it all was like, you know what, maybe this should operate more like an agency. And that's fine. There are different ways to skin that cat, but it really depends on how your chapter is designed fully depends on the campus that you have.
Mm.
If you have a campus that's very mobile, people are not staying a lot of time on that campus, you really got to weigh your options. It just really depends on your campus life and how your student body really interacts with you. Now, that's my observation. And Derek, I'm sure you have your own observation too. But that's from my experience as a coach. It really did feel like having a label there felt like putting a square peg to a round hole.
Yeah. So I'll speak to my experience. I think that to some extent, all campuses would more or less have that same experience. All coaches initially would have that same experience. I think that to an extent, a lot of it is also based off the fact that all of our experiences as coaches were also different too, right? Like, I mean, for all intents and purpose, I was really the only coach who had some prior experience and knowledge on what it was really like dealing with, campus culture, politics, also understanding that every single campus was going to be a little bit different too, right? All well, fine and cool. But and Rock isn't here to talk about it. Rock isn't here to talk about it, but he had a lot of success, even though he was new to it. But we can refer to his interviews, right? When he was mentioning it, especially the interview on episode 1 of season 2, where he spoke about how he kind of did his coaching approach. And what Rod said was basically that he really let the students just be themselves, tell their own story, and kind of like take the lead in things.
Did he say that before or after I beat him?
This was before. This was before.
I know.
This was before. But it doesn't change the fact, again, you may have beat him, but it doesn't change the fact that in the series, Kennesaw still came out on top. So overall, he still had a better record than the GGC team.
We competed twice.
Okay.
I think that does touch on something important, though, to make the distinction for at least. And either one of you, please kind of chime in on this. But I think, Prez, you'll still probably have kind of the best position to be able to explain the difference between this. Since we did kind of add the need for a coach later in the program, what is the difference between what kind of the student chapter leadership handles versus what the coach facilitates?
I think that's a great question. And I think that part of the issue that we talk about is that in what we kind of discovered is that though a coach is absolutely necessary as a mentor, especially when we're talking about preparing for competitions, coaches have a unfortunate side effect of potentially spoiling a chapter. And if chapter leaders don't take the actual lead on figuring out how to actually serve their campus community, then they're going to be looking for the coach to do a whole bunch of things that the coach can't actually do. It's never it is impossible for a coach to be as tapped in with a college community as those leaders and members of that chapter actually can be. But when these students don't really understand that they have to lean into what their campus gives them and not what it is that they want to get out of it, they will make that mistake and then look to their coach to tell them, oh, what are we doing wrong? And the answer is, what you're doing wrong is you're not looking at your own campus environment in order to make the decisions about what you need to do for your campus. So one of the ways that I kind of push back on, the story about you know, GGC struggles during the moguls competitions is when we talk about, oh, everybody's a commuter, they're not really on campus. Yo, we walked that campus. They got dorms, somebody else got dorms. So the question is, are you trying to get at people who aren't on campus, or are you actually catering to the people that are? And when we look at the demographic of people that are on campus, no, those people aren't being represented. They aren't having their voices heard. They're not participating in the chapter. And then you wonder why they're not showing up to matches. They're not volunteering with the chapter. They don't have any representation, and you can't get people to come to events because you're not looking at what's actually happening in your chapter or at your school. You're trying to force what you want to see rather than what actually is. And every chapter, Georgia State, Kennesaw, GGC, Georgia Tech, AUC, every chapter has made that mistake at least once. Every single one.
No, you actually bring up something that I think we really should speak on in that regard, because there is a level of personal responsibility that every chapter has to have, that is a full reflection on its internal leadership. Are you doing this because you want to? Are you doing this because you want to do this your way? Or are you doing this the way it needs to be done?
Mm-hmm.
And that gets exposed real quick. That's not something that like you can do forever, especially if it's from selfish means. Like, especially if it's like, oh, I'm doing this the way I want to do it. You'll see it real quick. Like
Sure.
I can like just speaking on the idea of going back and forth, you know, seeing what the chapter was doing week to week, and then I'll leave 1 week and then come back the next week and see things have like completely changed. And I'm asking the question like, hey, what's going on? And it's almost like that learning curve of actually being a leader and leading
Right.
a chapter. Like, that's a steep learning curve if you're in it for yourself and you're not actually trying to build something for your campus or
Sure.
intentionally build something that functions. Because that's,
Right.
I mean, everyone in here is an entrepreneur. We know what type of time that's on. How many times do you run across someone that just pivots every time they don't get what they want? They're just
Mm-hmm.
always pivoting from time to time. And it's not that the business that they had in the beginning was poor. They don't want to admit to the fact that their execution was bad. So what
Sure.
do? They pivot to another idea and they say, oh, it was this, it's the market, it's this, it's whatever. There's a balance between having great mentorship and good leadership to pair with that mentorship. You're the captain of your ship.
Absolutely.
If Derek were to leave GSU right now, there's no question that they would be able to handle themselves. No one is at KSU like that right now. They handle themselves very well. There's an establishment of leadership. It's understood that, well, I shouldn't say it's understood. It's also a part of the fact that they have a culture of those things there too.
Right. Right. That is true. And to speak
They
to
both have that.
that, the part where this is a correlation, right? Like, and what we're showing through this, and we're showing it, though they're learning it what would be considered the hard way. What we're really speaking to is an understanding of their market, right? A need for them to actually understand their market, understand the market, right? Like, because that's what so many people like who want to get into music, they don't really get. Like, when you're going into the business of this, yes, this is passion driven, but it never changes the fact that you have to understand what's going on in the market. You have, like, when you're a chapter leader, the most important thing you can do is understand your market. Understand what cultures exist on your campus, which of them are motivated to actually like engage with you, and how are you catering to them? See, one of the exciting things that we're seeing about Kennesaw this year, Kennesaw and the new leadership that's at Kennesaw, because there's some carryover, but Kennesaw has a new president this year. But this new president was already a member last year, right? So that's a benefit to them. And what this new president understands is that he has to tap into the existing culture of Kennesaw. So what did he do? He went to all of the other organizations on campus, the ones that he knew had a footprint, had visibility, and out of the gate for their demo show, right, where he was going to announce their roster, they threw a show inside of the amphitheater space on their campus and had over 700 RSVPs for this event. But partially, it's because he partnered with like 4 or 5 other organizations on campus in order to make it happen, right? Like, you know what I mean? But that's an understanding of not just what your campus culture is, but also how to execute on it. What sort of music needs to be played there? Who's going to be the DJ and all those other things? Like, you know, Kennesaw has decided that for their makeup of their campus, and you were speaking about how like it's different and they get to make their own decisions in a way, they've decided to roll out a whole NCEG KSU dance team. They got like 15 or so dancers just in a CE type of role and slot for their campus. Meanwhile, Georgia State has gone another direction, and they got like 2 or 3 DJs on their CE roster.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like, these are very different approaches, and we get to see how they're going to play those things out. But I can guarantee you that both of those decisions have been made, hopefully, based off the calculus of understanding that they're understanding their campus's culture.
Now, to that point, I think something that I really want to see is, you know, especially with the case study that we have with KSU and GSU. Something I really want to see is how they're manipulating their market, how they're able to mature that and scale it. Because it's cool if you can do it once, but if you can do it twice, you understand it, right? Can you continue to foster the leadership that allowed you to get this far? Can you replicate it? One thing that we're always taught in business is that concept. Like, it's not yours until you can replicate it. You haven't mastered it until you can make another like it. Right.
Yep.
That's the part that I want to see. I want to see them say, okay, I have these great rosters. I have this amazing, we have this amazing situation in the way that we built this chapter out. Cool. Do it again. Can you do it next semester? How about that? Can you do it in the spring? Let's just start there. Because that's something, because we've also seen that happen. We've seen chapters do really well in one season and then fall off next season. Oh, someone has a different class schedule now, and now all of a sudden the whole business is scuttled.
We've certainly seen that kind of lightning in a bottle kind of aesthetic where one chapter, 1 year just kind of pulls kind of dramatically away from what all of the other chapters can kind of achieve in that same kind of time frame. But like both of you were saying, I think that's why being able to kind of track what works and what doesn't from any of those kind of schemes that they try to set up is so important. And talking about that, getting kind of into the meat of the next big thing that the nonprofit has to show, before we get into what it actually is and what metrics it actually tracks, Atlas, I wanted to ask you first, because I felt like it was more poignant to ask a person whose background is solely in tech why being able to track the kind of achievements and the advancement of these kind of college artists is so important, and why there's been such a gap in kind of our ability to do that thus far in the industry.
Okay, and I'll keep this concise because I know when Derek picks it up, he's I'll give you the alley oop, brother. I'll give you the alley oop. Now Derek and I have been musing over this for what is it, 2 years now?
Yeah.
It's been about 2 years, maybe more actually.
Maybe
But-
more. Yeah.
Maybe more. But we were musing over this for a while because we started to notice how I think it really just came from watching those catalogs being sold coming out like during the quarantine and after. And we're seeing all these people sell their catalogs. And me as an IP person, I'm like, that's stupid. Like, that was my first reaction. I remember I called Derek, it's like, this is the dumbest thing I've seen ever. Why are you selling an asset that has that much value? You just decided you want to give it away. And what metrics are they using to value this particular asset? When we look at stuff like, then we started to investigate things like chart metric and whatnot. And what we found was how, yes, the industry is data driven, sure. But on what grounds and how democratized is it for everyone to be able to utilize? We got high school students right now in every form of athletics you can think of that their record will follow them in college, and their college record will follow them into the majors. Right. We've seen it happen a dozen times, especially amongst like the big three: baseball, football, and basketball. Like, we've seen it happen so many times where everyone's stats just continue to carry throughout their career. Now, when we think about that, that's another part of the entertainment industry that's incredibly important. That stats validate the value of what is being output.
Sure.
But we don't outsource, these things to the rest of the world like that. What we do outsource is music. There's not a single country that I can think of that doesn't have some form of whatever art form we've made in the past 50, 60, 70 years, that's a form of expression for them, some part of the world.
True.
Period. Now, what about those artists that have, what about those artists and their catalogs and their impact in the industry? How do you measure that? And for us moving forward, the thought was, okay, well, we want to be able to capture as much of these metrics as possible that are relevant to an artist's viability. We want to show that, hey, this person, this is the one you want to put your money behind. If we can do that for athletics, we should be able to do that for this, because now the space of music is just as competitive, if not more.
Well, so let's always try to keep it relevant to, I think, the people that are most likely to be watching this. And that will be our members. So from the perspective of the artists themselves that will be represented in this new system, and kind of their management that will be able to use these stats to help coordinate the shows that they're going to be doing, and maybe even to build their sets from there, getting more and more granular from there. Can you explain, I think, just kind of an overview of what we will actually be tracking and why that is so important for what we in particular are teaching for our members?
Ultimately, because as Atlas said, we've been musing over this for the past couple years. And again, like, it really started prior to that. I mean, we've been really talking about the need for this development system for over a decade now. But when we really talk about presenting our findings in a way that the general public can also see it, the important part is that, all right, the artists themselves, our students, and our members are seeing the exact same stats that we're going to be showing publicly, right? Because that's what's important when you're talking about, the viability and people being able to really get behind these artists and understand what it is that they're seeing when they're seeing the quote unquote success. Because we can see, you know, theoretically successful artists when we see them blow up on TikTok or Instagram, but
Right.
but we also see how the industry says that doesn't really mean anything, and all us in the industry know that doesn't really mean anything, but the artists don't understand why it doesn't mean anything.
Sure.
Right? And that's where the students are also learning from. The students see the vanity and they think, oh, this person done blew up, not knowing that person just got offered probably the shittiest deal that they're ever going to get offered based off of those vanity metrics. And nobody understands why. So when we started thinking about the metrics that we were going to be putting together, that's really what it was. It was like, all right, what's the totality of metrics that we need to put together and show so that our students and the general public can clearly understand why we're going to be backing some artists and why we're going to be sending some artists back to the development board, regardless of how much clout they may be generating at the top. So that's the context. And ultimately, we ended up landing on 4 key components. Okay, so that's going to be. So I'll start with the 2 that people kind of already can guess at. There's the music stat that we track, which is, basically some variation of how well, without getting into the weeds, it's like streaming numbers, put simply. It's, how well this artist's catalog and music is actually performing, which, as we know, is, of course, very important. And then, so we'll call that the M stat.
Okay.
And then there's the fans component, right? And we'll call that the F stat. Now, notice that when I say fans, we're not talking about followers, okay? But typically, that's what people think about when they're talking about followers, right? Like, when they're thinking fans, like people relate, oh, we got a whole bunch of followers, or, oh, we got a whole bunch of streams, okay?
Mm-hmm.
For us, that's 2 out of 4 of our tracking components, and that's very important, okay? So you got your music, how well your streaming numbers are doing, and you got your actual fans. So our metrics are designed to look at not just the followers, but also we're looking at engagement metrics. We're looking at all of those. We're looking at conversion metrics. All of those go into our fan stats. But then we have 2 other stats for us. And those are the show stat, which has everything to do with your performance capability, as well as so that's qualitative analysis mixed with quantitatively your ticket sales contribute to your show stat, right? So now we're really starting to talk about that those other metrics that right now technologically outside of the NCEG platform, the general public doesn't have any awareness about those things. They don't really see oftentimes how often an artist is going viral but can't get 20 people to show up to a show.
Right.
Now, I think it's really important to note that the beauty of this is the fact that NCEG also allows this to be possible. Yeah, if it wasn't for the fact that NCEG was designed the way it was, if you were to have an artist in the real in the outside world try and gather this, it would be very difficult to do so outside of a system like ours.
Right.
I think that needs to be made very clear.
Yeah, and that's super important, right? And it's because of this ecosystem that we've built over the course of the last 10 years that this is even possible, right? The way that we're capturing this stuff and turning this stuff into data so that the general public and the students can actually see their results, right? So that would be the third stat, the S stat, standing for show. And then there's our T stat, which is the team, which is such a valuable stat to have, that we talk about it all the time, but nobody really understands how to like quantify the level of importance that it has. So we have a team stat, and that team stat talks about, in our context, the contribution and capabilities of the people who are around that artist, how that creates a very, very, very predictable insight into what that artist is likely to do. Right? So having a whole ranking in our system that allows us, because again, NCEG is not really about the artists. The artists are just a framework for us to be able to have these conversations. So when we're talking about the entire team, that entire team actually makes up a portion of that artist stat in the first place, because we know from data and history that most of the time the teams that these artists are building with when they're in our program are mostly going to be the same people that they stay with, oftentimes even after they graduate, or at very least it will inform how they move with their team after they graduate, even if it is different people. So those would be the four things that make up the NCEG artist stats, right? Like, so when you're looking at NCEG's stats platform, you know, you got those four categories: MSTF, music, show, team, fans. Those quantifiable data points that are only quantifiable really because of the NCEG platform is what will make up, you know, NCEG's, you know, or that artist's overall like NCEG score, and allow us to really track that artist's progression over time.
Well, there you have it from the horse's mouth. NCEG now has a premier way to track your progression, both as an artist and as a productive team. While you are in college, that will absolutely go to further boost your resume as you graduate and move on into kind of your professional field. Gentlemen, any closing arguments before we check out from here?
No, I'm good. I think we covered most of it. I mean, I definitely think if there's anything to say, just impress upon the students and understand that this is something that ideally was going to follow you throughout your career, and you want it to, because you're going to actually have the ability to advocate for yourselves. This is your resume, not just your releases, not just who you went on tour with, but this is actually data that is being presented in such a way that now when you graduate and you've gone through the system, you have some real metrics to show your success. Right. And that's the whole reason why we designed it the way that we did, just to be able to give you something to move, you know, come out of NCEG with that ain't nobody else is going to have unless they're in NCEG. And this is a huge qualifier. And we've seen this work really well for some of our students that have come out of our platform and going into the NCEG network. This is just a one-up to that. And I think that's something that I hope all of the students that are listening to this definitely take to heart and take it seriously, because, you know, there's a lot of benefit you can get from this, for sure.
Absolutely well said. And to our members, don't worry about it. There will be media forthcoming from the nonprofit itself showing you how to access this information, along with some potential points about what you can do with it and why it should be so important to you. So don't worry if you didn't digest everything in this kind of introductory explanation of it today. We will have more kind of lasting things that we can leave with you that can make this information more accessible and useful to each of you as individuals and as chapters. But until next time, this has been the Future of the Music Industry podcast. Make sure if you're watching this on YouTube that you subscribe with the button below and ring the bell next to it so that you can know when the next episode comes out so that you can keep up with the new things that the nonprofit can give to you along the way in your artistic journey. I am Javi. Joined with me is Atlas and Prez. We will see y'all next week. Thank you.